Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the absolute roller coaster that is the 500-year evolution of the world's undisputed superpower. We're going to unpack the whole shebang, from early exploration and aggressive expansion, right through some wild economic maneuvering, all the way to some pretty hard-hitting modern realities.
So let's kick things off with a little thought experiment. Picture the ultimate economic juggernaut. If I asked you right now, which country's brands are the most recognized, who's taking home the most Nobel Prizes, and crucially, whose gross domestic product is literally soaring past $20 trillion,
And to top it all off, who's packing the absolute strongest, most technologically advanced military on the face of the Earth? I mean, you already know the answer. It's the United States of America. But how exactly did that happen? Like, what on earth did they do to get to that level of dominance?
Well, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll cover the global superpower, colonization and independence, territorial expansion, world wars and wealth, the Cold War era, and finally, the modern reality.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the global superpower, shifting the world's wealth. No, if you look at the historical timeline, it's actually wild. For a staggering 1,800 years, India and China were the undisputed centers of the world's GDP. Literally, most global trade revolved right around them. It wasn't until the 1900s, which, think about it, is just the last century, that the USA really started gaining massive dominance, just skyrocketing to the top to claim this huge slice of the global wealth pie. Moving right along to Section 2, colonization and independence, the foundations of a nation.
Let's rewind to 1492. Christopher Columbus arrives, and bam, it kicks off this massive wave of European colonization by Spain, France, and Britain. But as we know, this era brought a truly devastating historical reality. In the years that followed, the Native American population plummeted by an estimated 80 to 90%. And the primary reason wasn't even just armed conflict. It was the introduction of European diseases, things like smallpox and influenza, that these native tribes just had absolutely zero immunity against. Fast forward a little bit, and those British colonies are growing fast. But hey, so is the tension. The British Empire was practically drowning in debt after the 7 Years' War, and to pay for it, they started heavily taxing the 13 colonies. And things escalated quickly. We're talking the Sugar Act in 1764, the Stamp Act in 1765, leading straight to the tragic Boston Massacre and the famous Boston Tea Party. All that colonial frustration with these super heavy-handed policies led to an inevitable push for independence, finally culminating in the Declaration of Independence in 1776. Just like that, a new nation was born.
Okay, that brings us to Section 3, territorial expansion, beyond the 13 colonies. So this newly formed nation had a massive hunger to expand. And they didn't just sit back and wait for states to join voluntarily. They actively acquired huge new territories. Like, they bought Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. They overthrew the Kingdom of Hawaii and just annexed it. They even paid Spain $20 million to annex the Philippines. So while theoretically they weren't a quote-unquote traditional colonizer like Britain or France, America was aggressively growing its footprint and its economy in a way that looked an awful lot like an empire.
Next up is Section 4, World Wars and Wealth, the economic pivot.
Now, during the two world wars, major powers, France, Germany, the UK, were basically destroying each other on European soil. But the USA? They were sitting pretty, safely across the Atlantic Ocean. Now, to be clear, American soldiers absolutely fought and tragically died, but the U.S. homeland, the domestic infrastructure, it wasn't bombed into rubble. In fact, they supplied massive amounts of weapons to the Allies and came out making a net economic profit from the conflict. That positioned them literally miles ahead of their completely ruined European counterparts. And here's the specific year that really sealed the deal: 1944. As World War II was winding down, 44 Allied nations came together. Because the European economies were essentially crashing, they desperately needed stability. So, they agreed to link their own currencies directly to the highly stable US dollar, which at the time was linked to gold. And boom, just like that, the US dollar became the global standard, permanently cementing America's financial dominance on the world stage. Moving into Section 5, the Cold War era, global consolidation. The Cold War wasn't your typical direct military battle. It was this massive ideological showdown between capitalism and communism, fought almost entirely through proxy wars. The geopolitical playbook deployed by agencies like the CIA was super systematic. Step 1, identify countries where communist ideas were gaining traction. Step 2, financially or militarily fund the opposition or rebel groups. And Step 3,
ultimately topple those governments. We saw this exact strategy play out in the 1964 Bolivian coup and later, of course, with Operation Cyclone in Afghanistan. Because the US intervened in the internal politics of so many nations to counter Soviet influence, a lot of these countries became heavily dependent on them. And to really project that global authority, the US currently maintains a staggering 800-plus military bases spread across more than 70 different countries. I mean, their incredible military power today is a direct result of the immense spending that started right back in the Cold War.
But let's be totally clear here. Military and economic might is only half the story. America's internal policies turned it into an absolute talent magnet. They actively attracted some of the most brilliant immigrants from all over the globe. We're talking minds like the German physicist Albert Einstein, the South African entrepreneur Elon Musk, and incredible Indian talents like the astronaut Kalpana Chawla and tech exec Satya Nadella. This whole culture of encouraging pure talent and pushing innovation fundamentally fueled their superpower status from the inside out.
And finally, that brings us to Section 6, the modern reality, life inside the superpower. Now, here is where we need a bit of a reality check. Despite the USA being the wealthiest nation on Earth, it's also one of the most unequal. Get this, the top 1% of the population owns a massive 42.5% of the country's wealth. So all that immense global prosperity we've been talking about, it absolutely does not flow evenly down to the everyday citizens. When we look at the actual ground reality, the stats are honestly quite grim. As of 2020, homeownership was stuck at 65.8%, which means nearly a third of Americans don't even own the roof over their heads. Add to that a notoriously expensive healthcare system, crippling student debt that's dragging down millions, and severe domestic safety issues. I mean, there were over 600 mass shootings in the year 2020 alone. It sets up this incredibly fascinating juxtaposition. On one hand, you have the US model, laser-focused on massive military spending and global dominance. But then look over at Nordic countries like Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. These places are definitely not military superpowers by any stretch of the imagination, but they far surpass the US when it comes to everyday human developments, safety, and just overall quality of life for the average person. Which leaves us with one final, pretty heavy question to think about. After tracing 500 years of history, incredible wealth, and nonstop expansion, we really have to ask ourselves, should a country actually strive to be a superpower, commanding the globe and projecting all that military might? Or should it just focus its resources on improving the everyday lives of its own citizens? It is definitely something to chew on. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next one.